Report. Okay. So for those of you that don't know me, I am Sarah Hancock. I am now the Performance and Strategy Analyst with the City of Greensboro's Budget Department. As I had said, if you could just drop in the chat who you're representing, that'd be fantastic. I am going to go through a short presentation. I have been able to scale this one back a little bit. I know that some people have already spent some time with me. So as we get closer to the end of this period, I'm going to try really hard to make sure people can ask questions and focus my time there. I will also be keeping an eye on the chat as I talk. So if you have questions throughout, just throw it in the chat and I'll try to address it as they come up. And with that, I'm going to throw up my presentation on the screen. Okay, welcome everybody. See lots of nonprofit organizations, LLCs. Wonderful, welcome everyone. Okay, so I am going to share my screen here. Share. Presentation mode for you guys. All right, so as hopefully everybody's in the right place, welcome to the American Rescue Plan office hours. We have been very excited about being able to offer these in person and over Zoom and have had a tremendous response. So I am super excited you guys are here and attending with us. So thank you so much. So for those of you who are not familiar with ARP, that's our shorthand for it. Greensboro has received just shy of a $60 million allocation. We received about half of that in a disbursement and expect the next by next year. We have to obligate these funds to organizations or within our own budget by the end of 2024, and all funds have to be spent by the end of 2026. That means any organization that is allocated funding through this process or any department, city department, would have to have these funds completely spent by that time period. That's an important date to note during your application process so that you make sure that your application and proposals can be completed within these timelines. Also, something that we have really been focused on is the Department of Treasury has been giving us guidelines and updates throughout this process. We are still waiting on final guidance from them. So we are operating off of what they're calling the interim final rule. And local governments are required to give periodic updates on these funds and how we're spending them. It's a very transparent process. And any organization that is allocated funds will be expected to be a part of that reporting process. So just some things to keep in mind as we go through this. I'm not going to click on these links here, but these are all available on our website. This presentation is also available on our website. So don't feel like you have to grab links right now or anything like that. But this is all the Department of Treasury compliance and guidance. So if you want to dig through them and kind of check out what the Treasury says about these and how we've interpreted them, you're welcome to. I will tell you that the ARPA fact sheet 2021, that third one down there, to me has been the most helpful quick look at what this is really intended to be used for. So definitely would recommend scrolling through those while you're trying to navigate the application process. The City of Greensboro is looking at the funding in two different categories. One is our general allocation. This is really where city projects and revenue loss is addressed. For example, the Tanger Center and Greensboro Coliseum were closed for the entire duration of the North Carolina shutdown. We chose not to lay off any employees during that time period to help sustain our employees and make sure that we were not contributing to any job loss. So we did incur costs that were not made up during that time period. So there is a lot of latitude within those funds for us to help fund city programs and replace some of that revenue. The side that you guys are probably going to be the most interested in are the specific eligible uses. The Department of Treasury has given us lots of different examples and arenas that we can work within. It is very diverse and there is a quite large latitude, but there's also some pretty strict rules around them. But the categories that they emphasize the most are those that encourage public health, economic impact due to COVID-19. One is premium pay, which at this time is just related to employees of the City of Greensboro, but we're still looking into those distributions, and then infrastructure projects, mainly access to water, sewer, and broadband. Some ineligible uses, just to put it simply, we can't save this money. We can't pay pension funds with this money. We can't settle judgments or any kind of settlements with this money. We can't pay our debt with it, and we can't use it for matching funds. So there are restrictions around this. It's basically a way to make sure that we go ahead and funnel this money directly into city services and community programs by that deadline. The City of Greensboro has identified 3 priority areas that we are really focused on during our review process, and most of your applications will probably fall into these. I have spoken to, at this point, hundreds of people, and I have not yet heard anybody who has presented something to me that's completely outside of the scope of possibility. You can see here community asset renewal. That's really going to be city programs. Our premium pay, COVID testing, our facility maintenance needs that we have that are backlogged, any type of sustainability improvements, and then any of that revenue loss replacement that I had mentioned earlier. Additionally, we're most projects that we'll be partnering with the community on, as well as helping those that have experienced the negative impacts of COVID-19 will fall in the second category, the equitable economic recovery category. That's where we're going to be supporting housing efforts, transit efforts, probably support to nonprofits and businesses and impacted industries. This is also where we emphasize qualified census tracts and help to disadvantaged communities. And then finally, community transformation are those large scale projects, big things that we are going to see in the City of Greensboro long after this money is spent and whenever our children are paying the tax bill on the monies that have been spent. So we're talking about community changing projects, things that we will actually visibly see. And here at the top, you'll see a couple of buzzwords, right? Transformative, equity, sustainable, financially sound. All of these words at the top are basically shorthand for our criteria, how we will be evaluating and considering these applications. And we would hope that anything that falls underneath these categories and is funded through this process will indeed meet one, most, or all of these priority areas. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. So how do you submit for funding? That's what you're here to hear about, right? So all funding requirements must meet the basic eligibility. That is a very squishy term right now. What is eligible? Well, at this point, eligibility is really around those focus areas that I mentioned previously. We're asking that people submit a complete and responsive application. When we say responsive, we mean really thoughtful responses to the questions. If a question does not apply to you, that's okay. We don't expect every single criteria to meet, to be met by an organization. I wouldn't expect a food truck that is helping feed the homeless have a significant impact on critical infrastructure, for example. So really spend time being responsive to the questions and aligning yourself with our priorities. We've given you a lot of resources to review and just making sure that you have robust answers to those questions. We have provided a budget template that you will need to fill out that gives us your costs and revenues for the program or the need that you have identified. We're just asking that you either give us that budget application or that budget template with the entire budget, or you can put it in as a yearly budget and specify that you'll be asking for funding for several years. Make sure that the total cost that you're asking for reflects all years, even if the budget is a yearly budget. Attach any supplemental information that demonstrates that you can submit this program. So if you have annual reports, any kind of demonstration of performance metrics, any previous successful programs that you can kind of show us your experience doing this kind of work for the community, you are absolutely welcome to attach that. Additionally, if you have had any funds that have been awarded or have been committed to your program, you are welcome to attach those letters of intent from those organizations to let us know that you already have some funding and some commitments from other partners. If there is anything that you cannot include in the application for any reason, we do ask that you include a cover letter explaining why, and that is more applicable to the 3 items underneath A 501(c) status does need to be submitted for any organizations that are nonprofits, as well as the most recent Form 990 that you've submitted. And then once again, if you are a business that is applying for funding, we just need your proof of registration with the North Carolina Secretary of State. If for some reason you can't provide one of those things because you're in the middle of filing or something is awry for whatever reason, we just need that cover letter explaining. I do want to point this out because we've had a little bit of brand confusion around what processes go with what. If anybody is looking for emergency rental, housing, or mortgage assistance, ARP is not the right process for that. ARP has very different requirements and is really meant to be a subrecipient program. So we are awarding funds to other organizations to carry out programs in kind of lieu of the city, or we are asking that people are or in some way impacting those industries that have been negatively impacted by COVID-19. If you or anybody are looking for housing assistance, you need to go through our neighborhood development program. This is a totally different pot of money with totally different regulations and is not headed up by my department. So I would just like to include that this is the best place to go for housing assistance. I see here we have some tables that support our application. We note part of the answer is included in an attachment. Great question. Yes. So if you for some reason find that you need to demonstrate a different in a different way a question, either through a table or a timeline or a graphic, you are absolutely welcome to attach those to your application. Anything that is going to help tell your story better, we are welcoming you to attach. I have not experienced yet where anybody has hit the attachment limit. So if you are the first, you get a prize, I guess, because that's the one thing that I have not had happen yet. Can you submit renderings videos? I have not had somebody attach that. If you have a link to a YouTube, I believe you can add a link into the fields, but I will tell you, I'm not sure about attaching an actual video link. If that does come up, you are welcome to email it to me directly and I can attach it to your application. So the review criteria here is basically a combination of several different components. You're absolutely welcome. It is a combination of the interim final rule and the Department of Treasury's different requirements and different specifications on how to spend the funding. It is state statutory requirements, how we are allowed to spend money in the state of North Carolina. There are statutory requirements. And some roadblocks as well. And then it is also a combination of the City of Greensboro's community outreach efforts, what the community has demonstrated through previous planning processes, as well as in community engagement through surveying or work on our simulator, the priorities that have been identified by our community members, as well as the priorities that have been identified by our city council. So there's a lot of different components, and we spent many months working on getting this criteria together to make sure that it was all encompassing. I will reiterate again that just because somebody's project does not meet every single one of these criteria does not mean it is not eligible for funding. You can have one really strong tie, several really strong ties, or you could meet all of them. I would not expect that, but we definitely want to reiterate that you do not need to meet every single criteria to be eligible for funding. So I mentioned the previous planning efforts. If you can tie your project to any of our plans, our comp plans, thoroughfare plans, housing plans, we absolutely want to see those ties. There are links to some of those plans on the application. So if you need examples or you want to go check them out to kind of see what your ties are, even if they are indirect, you want to specify that. Scale and management speaks to your ability to actually carry out these plans. We definitely want to know that you can fill out a budget and have a good cost estimate of what you'll be doing. Any type of implementation timeline that you can provide that shows us that you will be able to spend the funds by the end of the time period, which is 2026, December 2026. And then this is not so specific for community partners, but for city departments, we do need to make sure that there are not significant ongoing costs for our own city departmental spending, and that is because that will have to be absorbed into our general budget, and we just need to be aware of that. Equity is one of the most important components of this. About 3 of the 10 pages of the interim final rule are dedicated to equity and dedicated to investment in disadvantaged communities. It is also a very high priority of our council and a very high priority of our community. So any project that invests in disadvantaged communities, stabilizes businesses or organizations or neighborhoods if impacted by COVID-19, or addresses community infrastructure, housing disparities. These are all really important components. And if you can draw a connection, as well as provide any qualitative or quantitative data supporting that, we absolutely want to see that. Sustainability is really geared towards those that are building projects or investing in critical infrastructure that needs to be repaired. And then also, if anybody is doing work related to long-term energy use or doing any type of green infrastructure, green initiatives to help improve our, lessen our footprint on the climate. Financial stability and stewardship, it provides some sort of financial, stabilized financial condition. This can be either through the investment in the community, helping community partners have better stabilized conditions, working with those who are experiencing food insecurity, working with those who are experiencing healthcare insecurities. There is a lot of latitude when it comes to that arena. High priority programs and projects that are not allowed under ARP. That is kind of a squishy way to say if we can figure out how to do city programming through revenue replacement, we can do that. So it gives us a little bit more latitude in what we're able to fund. And then also we want to make sure that you are identifying other funding sources, right? There's a lot of money out there right now because of federal and state funding. For example, the county has about double what the City of Greensboro has received from the American Rescue Plan Act. And I believe that their process will be starting in the next month or so. So definitely reach out to the county, explore different avenues, and identify any partnerships that might help assist you in funding your project. And to that end, we want to know if you're collaborating with other organizations, if this is a collaboration between jurisdictions, between universities, between nonprofit organizations, several businesses coming together to form some sort of coalition. We want to know about that. And we absolutely want to have a display of your return on investment. How will that amplify your ability to provide programming? The priority ranking is really tied to those council priorities that I mentioned earlier. Those are in the application also as links. So underneath every question in the application, for those of you who have not been in there, if they do have references to any kind of PowerPoint plan or anything like that, we will include a link to get you to some examples, or in this case, to the strategic priorities of the council. And then also, is it transformative? Once again, talking about noticeable change in the city of Greensboro, particularly whenever we have large scale projects that breathe some new life into areas of Greensboro that maybe otherwise wouldn't have the funding or the attention that it needed in order to thrive. So if you have anything like that, that's going to be something you want to demonstrate well to us. I'm not going to go through this, but this is essentially everything I just went through on a scoring sheet. I would definitely recommend that while you're going through your application and crafting your answers, that you look at the ones that you are the most robust, you have the most robust answers for, and figure out where you would fall on this, whether you'd be green, yellow, or red. And if you're in the red or yellow and you feel very strongly that you can demonstrate your impact, think about having how to rewrite or include more metrics that would really demonstrate your case. So for example, with the priority ranking, well, actually I'm gonna switch to one that's maybe a little bit more. Okay, so collaborative, I'm gonna use that one as an example. So specific partnerships or funding have been identified So if you know you're getting funding from the county, or you know you've gotten a grant through, say, the United Way or something like that, include that and include what the goal of that partnership is going to be, how they're going to interact with this project, and then have that letter of intent from them that they've allocated funding. Where you would kind of fall yellow is like specific partnerships have been requested or under consideration. So maybe you've put out a request, but you haven't heard back yet, but we know that you're actively engaging in that collaborative partnership. So definitely use this to your advantage. Part of the reason we have included this in the packet is because we want to set you up for success. We want you to know how we're going to be looking at these. We also want to hold ourselves accountable to the review process. So we're asking you to identify your collaborations, and we want to make sure we're grading those collaborations when we're looking at these and making sure that we're conveying the right information to the council whenever they review these at the end, because ultimately they will be the decision makers on the funding. City staff will not be making the funding decision. So we want to make sure that we have the best possible information to provide to the council. Something else to keep in mind through this entire process is that if you are awarded funding, you will be subject to pretty stringent reporting requirements. We have already begun reporting to the federal government. From the moment we accepted the funds, we were subject to reporting requirements. So we have already submitted our first interim report, reporting that we have spent $859,000 of those funds to support the Tanger Center with some revenue loss replacement. We also have a recovery plan performance report, which is a long, very robust narrative report, but it will also have project updates for projects that we fund through this process. And we will also have to have performance metrics as well as spending metrics for every single one. We will do the large report once a year, and then the quarterly reports will have to be sent out every quarter. Our first one is due next week, and that is an expenditure report. So once we start really spending a lot of time and energy allocating these funds, we'll be asking for those organizations that get funding to be ready to report back to us, to the federal government, on a quarterly and yearly basis. I'm not really going to go through the application because I've kind of spoke to it, and I know there might be specific questions on it. But the application form, for the most part, they have 1,000-word limit. There's a little bit of confusion on some of those. It's not character, it's word limit. I need to have the IT department put some clarifying language on there. So that is important to note. I know for grant writers, that's very important. You need to know exactly how many characters you can fit into these boxes. But please note that you can submit attachments if you don't have enough space. The minimum requirement for funding is $25,000. That has a lot to do with city policies. We also have other programs for smaller grants that we would ask that people go through those processes, particularly the housing assistance. All of these questions, you'll notice after each one, there's a criteria connection that is pointing you to that criteria worksheet, that scorecard. So you can kind of look at why we're asking this question and how we'll be evaluating the question. So once again, giving you tools to set you up for success and make sure that you can engage with all the different components of this process. There is a question number 11 about qualified census tracts. We have this map and a link to the HUD website. These are the current census tracts. We did overlay the districts on there so that you can see what districts these census tracts are in, and then also the city boundaries, so you can kind of understand where these neighborhoods lie. Census tracts are a very easy way for us to tell that the community has a lower household income than other parts of the community, and it has a lower reporting standard from the federal government. That said, a census tract is not the only way to demonstrate that you are able to support disadvantaged communities or those disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. So this is another tool in your tool belt to help you to demonstrate need, but it is not exhaustive of demonstrating your influence or impact on disadvantaged communities. And I'm just going to also, the basic information we do need from you. we do need to make sure that you are an authorized representative of an organization. So we are asking you to verify that you have permission from this organization to submit an application on their behalf. The review process is still really being developed. We had to roll this out quite quickly at the direction of the council. But right now, our process in very loose terms is that the Budget and Evaluation Office, which is the office I work in, will be doing the initial review for completeness and compliance. That just means we're going to be making sure you had responsive questions, all your attachments are there, that you've met the minimum requirements in terms of how much money you've been asking for, that you've responded to the requirements for the 501c3 status or business status to that end. We'll also be putting them in kind of rough categories underneath those 3 funding areas that I showed you earlier. And at that point, they will be handed on to a staff review team that will be reviewing them for how they meet the different criteria on that scorecard. We are trying very hard to not make a competitive process where these are necessarily, this one's a 25 and this one's a 26. What we're really trying to do is how much impact can this organization demonstrate with the investment of this money to the city. We will then give those applications to the city council in January. And in January, the city council will look at those applications, they will look at our review, and ultimately they will make the funding decision about what organizations they want to receive ARP funding. And those will be announced in February of 2022. At that time, we will reach out directly to organizations that have received funding. It will probably be announced in a council meeting and will probably also be announced via news release and social media. And at that point, we will go under contract with those organizations. We will set up a scope of service. We will probably go under a financial review with internal audit. And you will be expected to have a full audit in order to make sure that these funds are being spent appropriately. And then from that point forward, we'll disperse the funds. At this time, I believe the funds will be dispersed in one payment. That has to do with the funding deadlines, but that could very well change based on any interim final rules or financial policies. If we do change from a one-time disbursement to a quarterly or monthly disbursement, I will certainly get in contact with those organizations and let them know immediately. And this is just to reiterate what I had already said about the implementation timeline. Right now, we're really in the rollout, right? We have just another week and a half for applications to be sent in to us. We are expecting quite a few applications. You do not have to get, first person to get their application in does not mean they're being reviewed yet though. So take your time, use the whole time if you need to, and know that I will continue to support this process until the very end and beyond, honestly. So if you have questions between now and November 5th, you are welcome to reach out to me with those questions. And people have definitely been taking me up on that. And I am happy to help you in any way that I can. So definitely keep that in mind. This is not a race to the finish, if you will. Application review will happen over the holidays. And then we are going to have those applications delivered to our council in January. Round 1 awards will be announced in February, and that's, like I said, we'll establish those contracts. And then we're going to spend a whole year watching the program implementation and getting updates from organizations. And then we're planning on reporting that in 2023 to our council at their council retreat. And then at that time, if there are any unallocated funds, we may engage in a round 2 process. But that will completely be dependent on available funds and council goals. Saw somebody drop something in the chat. I just want to check that real quick. Interactive tool. Yeah, that's a great map. I have to say I was very excited that the GIS team here at the city was able to put together such a great map on the fly. They did that for me very quickly. So hopefully that will be a great tool for you guys. Let's see here. If we ask for a certain amount, for example, 100K, is the only option to be approved for that amount, or could we get approved for less? I've been asked this quite a bit. If for some reason we do not have enough funding, or we can only fund you at a certain level, we will reach out to you at that time to ensure that you can still do the program at a lower funding level. So I would say ask for what you need, and then be prepared for contingency if you feel like that is something that you can handle. But yes, at the time, if we do find that we have less funding available, we want to fund maybe more organizations at lower levels, we will reach out to organizations at that time to discuss that. How do you figure out? Okay, yes. So that, Charlene, that tool that was dropped down a little bit further, that is also linked in the application. So you can definitely like zoom in right to the street level and see if you're in a QCT. Vicky says, if a group of businesses submit a collaborative request, does it exclude a participating business from submitting a request of its own? Absolutely not. We have some organizations that are, I know that, like, for example, UNCG is submitting a request in partnership with 2 other universities. They're also doing some things on their own. So you are absolutely welcome to do collaborative requests and then requests individually. Also, organizations are encouraged to submit more than one request if you have distinct programs or distinct needs that you want to cover, so that they don't kind of get lost in the shuffle. When will funds be dispersed? Generally, funds are dispersed within a couple of months after the execution of the contracts. Contracts processed at the city with any governmental entity can be a little cumbersome and take some time. But I would imagine 2 to 3 months after awards, we would see funds be dispersed. But we'll definitely have a clear timeline when we get closer to the actual award period. Do you know how much will be available for the community for this, and if there's an upper limit to the ask? So no, there is no upper limit to the ask. Once again, we are asking that people ask for what they need. I've had requests right at $25,000, and I've had requests at $5 million. And there is a large range in between. Once again, just ask for what you need. You know, this is definitely a time to dream it up and, you know, think about what you can do, but also be very clear about your ability to implement you know, those programs that you're looking for. And once again, the budget too, just demonstrating that the reason why you need the amount that you need is super important. As far as how much is going to be available for the community, I think the council is waiting to see how many requests we get and what the dollar value of those requests are. We have not been given direction on a specific pot of money. I know that they have not allocated more right now than $859,000. Any allocations to revenue loss or anything like that will be public record and will be done through council meetings. And I have not seen anything come through yet. That said, things could get spent for revenue replacement that will reduce that overall amount. But like I said, I really think the council's waiting to get a good handle on what the community needs are at this time. Yes, submit an application for each program. Let's see here. Are organizations more likely to be funded as a part of a collaborative? You know, I would love to tell you that I have an indication of what's more likely to be funded at this point. But I think that the focus of an application in terms of impact and how they can impact an organization or impact the community is really going to be more of the likely to be funded. They really are looking for things that are going to make a lasting change in our in our community. So I wouldn't say that collaboration is necessarily a sticking point, but it definitely does have a further reach. So, you know, if you have the opportunities for those, great. But smaller programs can often have huge footprints. So I would be very reluctant to say that would exclude you or put you on the bottom of the pile or anything like that. So definitely still submit, even if you are a smaller organization or not in a partnership. All right, I'm just going through all of the questions here and trying to make sure I don't miss anybody. Okay, I'm gonna go through my next few slides here, and then I will open it up fully for questions. So I'm almost to the end here. So looks like we are at the very end here. I should have unbolded 2 of these. The 21st and the 26th are now complete, or we're in one of them now. I do have one more in-person meeting at the Nussbaum Center, or sorry, at the East Greensboro now on East Market Street. I'll be there from noon to 2 on Thursday. And I will probably be doing first come, first serve on that. I probably will not do a presentation. I will just allow people to sign up and come talk to me for a few minutes. So if you want to attend that and ask in-person questions, I will be there for you. And then I will have one last office hour Zoom meeting on 11 to 12 on November 1st, and that will just be a Q&A as well. And here are our websites. All of this is, all the information I've given you is online, including this PowerPoint presentation. You are welcome to give me a call, although I will tell you I am getting a lot of phone calls right now, and it's getting very hard for me to get through my voicemails in a timely manner. I would prefer emails. Those are a little easier for me to respond to. Yes, absolutely, Jennifer. She just asked if you have questions in the meantime, can we email those to you? Absolutely. But like I said, the phone calls, it's filling up my inbox, and I don't always realize when my inbox is full because ours doesn't give us like an alert or anything like that until you already are missing phone calls. So emails are best. I can respond to you a lot easier. And then if for some reason I don't know the answer to your question, I can forward it along to the right people. So definitely feel free to reach out to me in the interim. I've also have been doing some 15 and 30-minute kind of meetings with organizations. I will tell you my availability is quite limited in that capacity at this point because my schedule has booked up quite quickly. So if you would prefer to schedule a phone call, just shoot me an email and we'll see what we can do. I'll do my best. Yes, this fingers crossed. The last 2 I have recorded have landed in cyberspace somewhere and disappeared. So I have had some trouble getting recordings online. I'm really hoping that this one I'm able to get online. If so, I will have online by no later than Thursday. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and I am going to, where will it be posted? So that greensboro-nc.gov ARC, like where you actually go and look at the application and all of that information, that's where I will list recordings. It'll be under supplemental information if I can get it up. So here's hoping. I'm really, really hoping that I can actually get a recording up for everybody. So with that, I've still got some time here, and I would be happy to answer any questions you have related to this. I hope I've given you some good information, but I know there are always exceptions and special questions. So if you could just either raise your hand or drop it in the chat, I am happy to talk with you. 25 participants. We've been having about 25, which is fantastic. And I am trying to think of any questions that have come up that I can provide you information for. We have had some questions about indirect costs. I will tell you, with indirect costs, we do not have a policy on that. You can include them in your application, but just recognize that ultimately we may not be able to fund indirect costs. So just keep that in mind if you include those in your application. I see Laura, did you unmute yourself? Did you have a question?
I did. It's a sort of a strange question.
That's okay.
Do you have, you know, we do grants, and sometimes one of the things we do is we show someone a budget that actually works, and then we show them a budget that doesn't meet the requirements. Do you have examples of something like that that you could post, like, this is a budget that is not working and this is an example of a budget that works?
I think I could probably put something like that together. I can probably get something like that up by the end of the week on our website. We haven't provided anything like that yet. But I definitely think that's something that we could probably put together pretty easily because, to your point, I think sometimes somebody else's budget template can be kind of confusing. I have had some applications that have come in where they filled out their template and then they've put their own version of the budget as an attachment to provide clarity. So definitely don't feel like you have to only provide on our template. We do ask for that just so that we have some uniformity with what's been provided. But if you want to attach any type of internal budget or something that you think conveys what you're doing a little bit better in your format to help add that context, absolutely do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And let's see here. Can you relay again in regards to internal audit? Great question. So internal audit, whenever we go under contract with any organization, they will do a financial review just to make sure that they are in compliance with state and federal regulations. This is generally more related to the Form 990s that are provided from the nonprofits. Businesses are a little bit different, and I honestly have not always been privy to those conversations and to that process. So I would have to get some clarity on that, which if you, Laura, if you could send me that question. Laura, are you a business or a nonprofit?
We're a nonprofit.
Oh, Laura, you're Laura on Archway.
Oh, the other Laura.
Okay. Oh, different nonprofit. Yeah, I think that's really what they're really reviewing for is the Form 990, that everything looks like appropriate and all of that. Now, as far as an actual audit, I believe most nonprofits and businesses do yearly audits. So we would just want to see after you've received funding, once you do your audit, kind of how that shakes out with our funding, and so that we can see how things are actually being spent. So just, yeah, that's pretty typical, I think, of most governmental funding. But kind of more regulations and policies around that will come out probably closer to actually putting the funding out. Staffing a fundable item, yes. Yes, as long as you can show us, the full cost of the staffing, and then to some extent, you might want to display beyond, if you're going to continue this program beyond that ARP time period, if you're planning on continuing it, will you be able to sustain it outside of the ARP funding? Because, once again, that 2026 deadline, does cut off the funding at that point. And with the disbursement being all at once, likely either all at once or yearly or quarterly or however it ends up being done, we just want to know if you're going to continue the program once ARP is done, or if it's time bound. And that's my little boy in the background. I apologize. All right. AJ asked, once the city decides to award funds on the form of contract, what would that process be like? Yes, it is a standard contract. That's a great question. The city has a standard contract for nonprofit and business organizations that we go under. It will be standardized. There are some pretty clear things we have to do as a governmental organization and keep in those. That said, there are often attachments, appendices, and things like that our legal team will review if there's for some reason anything that is kind of outside of the scope of the city, and then we'll go from there. I've seen some organizations have just some very specific language that we have to strike through because we're not statutorily allowed to do it or anything like that. But once again, that'll all be taken care of by our legal team and procurement team when the time comes. You're welcome. These are great questions, everyone. As you can tell, I'm a very chatty person, so sometimes it's hard for me to sit here and be like, okay, I'm just gonna wait. What if you put something in your budget that changes after the award? That's also a great question. That would be a part of that reporting. So we'll be asking for those quarterly reports, or, if you receive additional funding that allows you to expand the program or anything like that. You're just going to want to tell us through your reporting. If your scope of the project changes, we would absolutely want you to notify us of that. So like if you're expanding it beyond what you had initially said, or you found that it's successful, or that it's, you know, it's changing in any way, definitely let us know. Because and to that point, we'll be providing narrative to the federal government in that large like narrative report that I had mentioned, that's the yearly report. So any changes or anything like that, we will need to know about specifically, just to let the federal government know as well, because they're asking us for that information. Oh, thank you, Laura. So we're coming up on about 13 minutes left here. Let's see. So the program and budget can be amended via reporting. Yes, to a certain extent. You know, if you have any changes that are made that are large scale, we might need to revisit that if it in any way changes the contract and the scope of services that have been attached. So you definitely want to do that. Now, if it's just like, hey, we thought we were going to spend $50,000 on this person, it turns out we're going to contract that out to an outside entity. You know, you're still doing the same thing. You're just moving where the funds are being spent to another line item. So you have the autonomy to do that. But like I said, if the scope changes, I think we just need to make sure it's not in violation of the contract. And if we need to amend the contract with just an addendum letting us know that we're making some slight changes to the program, then that we would address it at that time. I filed the 990, however, I don't have a hard copy. Yeah, so once again, that's something that what you would do is indicate in your cover letter that you don't have an attachment for it at this time. But if you do have a link, or you know when you will receive the hard copy, like if there's a time period that you could get a copy from the federal government or whoever, that's what you would add in your cover letter. So we just know that we're going to be expecting it at some point, and there's a reason why we don't have it in the packet. So basically, you don't get checked off as an incomplete packet. We know that there's a reason why you don't have it. Of course, you're welcome. Absolutely. Yes, I hope this is beneficial. I know that it's a lot, but we realized pretty quickly that, you know, this is a once in a lifetime pot of money, and we want to make sure, and by we, I mean city staff, but also the city council wants to make sure that this is a transparent process and that we really engage with people. I have a lot of faith in it. I know it's a lot, but I think that this is a way for us to make sure that we're really having an impact, and that's why I got into public service. So I'm excited about it. So I'm glad that it's helpful. Okay. Well, I think what I'm going to do, since we're right at 10 minutes, I'm just going to hang out here and just wait for any more questions to come in. But if for some reason you've got to go, I know it's getting close to 7 o'clock, you know, go feed your kids, go kick up and watch some TV, work on your application, whatever you feel like doing tonight. And I'll just hang tight for another 10 minutes and answer any questions anybody has. But I just want to thank you very much for attending. We appreciate your engagement in this process. Once again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I will do my best to answer them, and good luck. And we'll be looking forward to getting your applications November 5th. Good question, Mike. There's a couple of different ways that LLCs will fall underneath this. So he asked, you know, how do LLCs fall underneath this? There are two ways that this could go, and I'm still not sure kind of the direction it's going. One is that we will be funding businesses, directly who are engaging in programs or providing services to the community, or have any kind of need because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll be funding them directly through this process. The second is that we are possibly going to be partnering with an organization that will facilitate some of these funds directly to businesses and organizations that have a need for either revenue replacement, staying afloat, or starting up a new program. If that happens, any business organizations that kind of fall under those parameters, those applications will be forwarded to that entity. So you won't get lost in this process. Those will be handed off to that group of people, and we should know about that sooner than later. So hopefully the time difference won't be too much, but once again, I just don't know. That's a decision the council has to make, and I have not been given direction on that front yet. So but LLCs, it really depends on what you're doing. That helping to support the impact of COVID-19, that's really where businesses fall. A lot of businesses had a rough time or had to close for a certain amount of time. So I've seen a lot of business applications come in where they are asking for support in continuing a program or something that benefits the community. And they talk about their experience through the pandemic and how that's impacted their business. That said, yes, I do think that this funding is a little bit more geared towards organizations and programs that provide those type of supports. But at this time, we're asking for any and all applications. So you wouldn't be excluded or prohibited from applying just because you're an LLC or incorporated or a sole proprietor or anything like that. Is there a way for one business or nonprofit to run more than one program or project? Yeah, we've had several organizations that have several programs that they're planning on submitting for, especially larger organizations have the capacity to do that. But I've even seen smaller organizations that have, several different programs they'd like to implement, and they want to hire staff to do that. So they're putting in for that. So yeah, you can absolutely do that. There's no limit. The limit does not exist, if you will. Everybody gets my reference there.
The budget you're talking about, the amount requested is the total amount over 5 years, but you can submit a budget for each year. So theoretically, you submit 5 budgets that breaks it down in an annual amount.
You could, if that's the best way for you to demonstrate it. I've had some organizations that what they've done is our budget, they've done the total budget, and then they've attached like their yearly budget. And then they've just in the narrative explained that. And that's totally fine. As long as it's clear that this is your total request and here's what we plan to use yearly. As long as that's clear, we're good. And then it adds up. Because we will check that.
I realize you said you're not real sure about disbursement, but theoretically it could be, let's say you request 125,000, 25,000 each year for 5 years. Theoretically, that 125 could all come like at the beginning of the project, and then you've got to set it aside to use throughout those future years. Is that correct?
Yeah, see, and that's where it's kind of like, do we disperse it yearly? Because, is it easier on the finance side to disperse it yearly for us and for you? A little easier for you to document what's happening. So yeah, that's the difficulty of it. On one hand, for large scale projects, it might make sense. I am hesitant to say that we would do it based on the organization, because depending on how many organizations and businesses,
a lot to keep up with.
Yeah, that I don't want to have that job. I would feel bad for a grants coordinator. So
potentially
yeah.
You need to be prepared to be able to have the financial infrastructure to kind of divvy that out in future years.
Yeah, you definitely need to, once again, you need to demonstrate that the scale of what you're requesting is something that you can handle. And that's not just on the implementation side, but on, the financial side. And that's part of the need for the audit and everything. We want to make sure that people, if they're getting these monies, that they're using them the way that they're intended. And that's not to be punitive. That's just, part of city, state and federal regulations around granting money.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Follow-up Trudy had on more than one program. Does it require separate applications? We are encouraging people to do separate applications for separate programs, simply for distinguishing. But if for some reason you submit one application, but we really only want it, one program is maybe something that we can support or we have the ability to do, then you'd have to parse it out, and it's really easier to distinguish them, and then you can make far more robust applications for each individual project. So we are encouraging you to do multiple. I would definitely do that. Okay, we're coming up on the last few minutes here. So if anybody has any final questions, now is the time. And then I am going to try to get this recording up by tomorrow or Thursday. And then I'm also going to try to work on a good budget versus bad budget, see if I can get that up online as well. I will do my best on that one. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Once again, this has been a pleasure. I'm always happy to help, and you can email me anytime. I've somehow kept up with it. So if I fall behind now, it'll be crazy. All right, well, I am going to go ahead and stop the recording. Yes, absolutely. I got one more here.